There are remote places, and then there is Bouvet Island. It sits alone in the South Atlantic with no permanent population, no harbor city, and no practical route for casual travel. People call it the world's most remote island, and that label is not a marketing phrase. Bouvet is separated from major landmasses by huge stretches of rough ocean, and even nearby islands are still far away by normal standards. What makes Bouvet fascinating is not only distance, but contradiction. It is tiny yet geopolitically real, uninhabited yet nationally claimed, and almost fully frozen despite being volcanic in origin. In this video, we are not treating Bouvet like trivia. We are using it as a lens to understand how geography, exploration, law, and environmental protection intersect in one difficult place. By the end, you will see why this island remained uncertain for decades, why people argued over what they had seen there, and why it still matters even though virtually no one lives on it. Start with where Bouvet actually is. The island lies near the southern end of the Mid-Atlantic Ridge in the South Atlantic Ocean. It is north of 60 degrees south latitude, which sounds technical but matters because that keeps it outside the Antarctic Treaty System zone. So Bouvet feels Antarctic in climate and isolation, but legally it sits in a different framework. Distances tell the bigger story. It is about 1,700 kilometers north of Antarctica's Princess Astrid Coast, around 1,870 kilometers east of the South Sandwich Islands, roughly 1,845 kilometers south of Gough Island, and more than 2,500 kilometers south-southwest of South Africa. Those numbers mean there is no nearby support network. If weather turns bad, there is no short detour to safety. If equipment fails, replacements do not arrive quickly. Isolation on Bouvet is not a mood. It is an operational reality that shapes every human decision connected to the island. Bouvet's physical structure is just as extreme as its location. The island covers about 49 square kilometers, and approximately 93% of that area is glaciated. At its center is the ice-filled crater of an inactive volcano, a dramatic reminder that heat and cold can define the same landscape across different timescales. Volcanic processes built the island, then long-term freezing and weathering covered it in ice and reshaped the terrain. Around the coast, there are skerries and a smaller island called Larsoya, but these do not solve the access problem. Coastal slopes are often steep, and ocean conditions are frequently harsh. That combination means Bouvet is difficult not only to reach but to physically touch. In the late 1950s, a major rockslide formed Nyroisa, creating one of the few relatively accessible landing areas. That single geological event became crucial for later human activity, including placement of a weather station, showing how minor topographic change can redefine what is possible on a remote island. The recorded human story begins in 1739 when French explorer Jean-Baptiste Charles Bouvet de Lozier sighted the island during a South Atlantic expedition with the ships Aigle and Marie. But this first encounter carried a built-in problem: no successful landing and inaccurate coordinates. In modern terms, that means the first data point was both important and unstable. The island entered navigation history, yet not in a form other crews could easily verify. This is a common pattern in early ocean exploration, especially in high latitudes where visibility can collapse quickly and sea conditions limit careful surveying. A sighting could be real and still difficult to relocate. Bouvet thus started as a known unknown, observed, named in connection with its discoverer, but geographically uncertain. That uncertainty mattered for decades because maps depend on repeatability. Without reliable repeatability, discovery becomes rumor-adjacent. Bouvet's early history is therefore not just about seeing land, it is about the long process of converting a sighting into trustworthy geographic fact. After the 1739 sighting, Bouvet effectively disappeared from confirmed records for a long period. It was not clearly seen again until 1808, when British whaler James Lindsay encountered it and named it Lindsay Island. This gap is crucial for understanding pre-modern navigation limits. Today, if a place is identified, satellites can recheck its coordinates within minutes. In the age of sail, verification required physically returning to dangerous waters with incomplete position data, and hoping conditions allowed visual confirmation. Infrequent traffic through the far South Atlantic made that even harder. A small island could remain hidden in plain sight simply because almost no one crossed its exact zone. The long interval between sightings is not evidence that explorers were careless. It shows how uncertainty accumulates when geography is hostile and observational tools are limited. Bouvet's rediscovery by a different expedition under a different name also foreshadows a recurring pattern. In remote spaces, naming and claiming often happened in fragmented, competing layers rather than one clean historical moment. In the 19th century, uncertainty expanded into competing claims. American sailor Benjamin Morel reported landing on Bouvet, but historians dispute that claim. In 1825, British captain George Norris claimed the island for the British Crown and called it Liverpool Island. He also reported a nearby landmass, Thompson Island, which later proved to be a phantom island. That phantom detail is more than a curiosity. It reveals how mapping systems can preserve error when verification is difficult. Once a feature appeared on charts, it could influence future routes and assumptions long before anyone disproved it. In distant oceans, cartographic momentum could keep doubtful information alive for years. Bouvet's history therefore includes both physical exploration and epistemic cleanup, the gradual correction of what people thought they knew. The island became a case study in why repeated observation matters. You cannot build reliable geographic knowledge from single sightings under poor conditions. Bouvet forced mariners and mapmakers to confront that limit repeatedly, until error and reality were finally separated. The modern sovereignty chapter started in 1927 when the first Norwegia expedition landed and claimed the island for Norway. At that point, Bouvet received the current Norwegian form of its name, Bouvetoya. In 1930, after dispute resolution with the United Kingdom, the island was formally recognized as a Norwegian dependency. This status is important because dependencies are governed differently from mainland regions. They often represent strategic legal responsibilities more than settlement projects. Norway's claim did not lead to urban development or migration waves, because Bouvet is physically unsuitable for ordinary habitation. Instead, sovereignty here means administration, regulation, and long-term stewardship in a location few people can reach. It also reflects a broader 20th century shift. Remote territories were increasingly managed through legal clarity and scientific rationale, not only symbolic flag planting. Bouvet demonstrates that even very small, uninhabited land can carry state significance. Jurisdiction determines who sets conservation rules, who authorizes access, and how the island is represented in international geographic and legal systems. In 1971, Bouvet Island was designated a nature reserve, and that decision fundamentally shaped its modern purpose. Reserve status means the island is not treated as an open frontier but as a protected environment with strict limits on disturbance. That makes sense because isolated ecosystems can be highly vulnerable. On small islands, a single invasive species, unmanaged waste event, or repeated human intrusion can alter ecological balance for decades. Bouvet's remoteness helps preserve it, but remoteness alone is not a protection policy. Formal legal protection creates enforceable boundaries around what activities are acceptable. It also supports scientific use under controlled conditions. Since there is no permanent civilian settlement, Bouvet offers researchers a rare opportunity to observe a largely undisturbed subantarctic system where climatic and geological processes can be studied with reduced human noise. This is the paradox. The island's value grows precisely because people are mostly absent. Conservation here is not about scenic tourism. It is about safeguarding baseline conditions that are increasingly rare on Earth. Even with modern navigation and forecasting, physically landing on Bouvet remains difficult. Sea conditions around the island are often severe, and large portions of the coast are steep, icy, or unstable. Reaching the island's waters does not guarantee a safe disembarkation point. That is why Nyrosa, formed by the late 1950s rockslide, became so important. It created one of the few comparatively manageable access areas and later hosted a weather station. On a normal coastline, one landing site might seem routine. On Bouvet, it is strategic infrastructure. A weather station in such a location can produce valuable atmospheric and ocean-adjacent data from a sparsely sampled region, contributing to wider models of southern ocean dynamics. The practical takeaway is that science in extreme environments depends on narrow logistical windows. Fieldwork is constrained by weather, sea state, and transport capacity, not just by research design. Bouvet reminds us that in remote polar systems, collecting one reliable dataset can require extraordinary coordination and patience. Bouvet also highlights an important legal geographic boundary. Because it lies north of 60 degrees south, it is outside the Antarctic Treaty System area. So while Antarctica proper is governed by a special multinational treaty architecture, Bouvet remains under direct Norwegian dependency governance. This distinction affects permitting, oversight, and administrative responsibility. It also challenges a common public assumption that all far southern places belong to one legal category. They do not. The Southern Ocean region is a patchwork of jurisdictions, claims, and conservation regimes layered over difficult geography. Bouvet sits at the edge of these frameworks, physically tied to the sub-Antarctic world but legally governed through national sovereignty. For policymakers and researchers, that edge position matters. It influences how missions are approved, how environmental controls are enforced, and how long-term monitoring is organized. In short, Bouvet is a small island with large legal relevance because boundaries in remote zones are not abstract lines. They shape what humans can do there and how responsibly they do it. There is a broader lesson in Bouvet's timeline: truth in extreme places is built slowly. First came sighting without reliable coordinates. Then long gaps, renamed encounters, disputed landings, phantom islands, and eventually corrected maps and settled jurisdiction. That arc shows how knowledge production works when direct access is rare. In connected regions, errors are corrected quickly because many observers can cross-check claims. In Bouvet's world, each verification attempt is expensive, risky, and infrequent. As a result, uncertainty can persist for generations. This is why Bouvet is valuable as a historical case. It teaches that exploration is not only dramatic first contact, it is repeated measurement, institutional memory, and willingness to revise assumptions. It also teaches humility. Even skilled mariners could misplace islands or report features later disproven. Modern confidence in maps rests on centuries of corrections like these. Bouvet therefore stands as both a geographic extreme and an epistemic one, a place that forced humans to improve how they verify reality at the edges of reach. So why should anyone outside polar science care about Bouvet Island? Because this one island compresses several global themes into a single case. It shows how physical isolation can shape political status. It shows how legal categories can diverge from climatic intuition. It shows how conservation can become the primary purpose of sovereignty in places where settlement is unrealistic. And it shows how reliable knowledge depends on repeated verification, especially where access is difficult. Bouvet is not famous for human stories of city life or commerce. It matters because it represents a limit condition: what happens when geology, ice, distance, and law intersect far from ordinary infrastructure. In a world defined by connectivity, Bouvet is a reminder that some places still resist constant human presence. That resistance is not a void. It is a source of scientific value, environmental significance, and historical perspective. The island's silence is exactly what makes it important, and why it continues to hold attention far beyond its tiny size. If you found this helpful, please like this video and subscribe for more explainers.